This is sort of lecture two, probation in Hawaii. I'm going to skip, there's a report that I referred to. I'll skip most of the preambles, but the goal here is we're going to look at a general description of felony probation outcomes. Okay. All right, so as I just said, that's what we're going to do in terms of the goal. Remember, felonies are your most serious crimes, right? Um, those are the crimes where you could end up in prison. So if you were on probation, you were told, even though you committed a felony, you're going to go out into the community, and if you're a good little boy or girl and follow the rules, we're not going to lock you up. Okay? I want to sort of just remember to talk about the policy trade-offs here. Prison's way more expensive, right? We might all say, well, shoot, just lock them up, right? Well, that's a policy choice you can make, but there are prices to pay, literally in more dollars, right? So clearly, if you were to stop using probation or to use it less, you're going to pay a lot more money for that privilege, right? You could argue, I mean, just logically, if you lock people up in prison, you're protecting the community more than if they're out in the community, right? Regardless, as you'll see, not a lot of people commit crimes while they're on probation, but the point would be is that theoretically that's true, right? But it costs money, okay? It's true, as you're going to see later in this lecture, more so than committing crimes, you got a good number of probationers who don't follow the rules, right? And a smaller of them even get arrested for new crimes while they're out in the community. So an understandable reaction is sort of like anybody who commits a felony and then is lucky enough to not be locked up if they mess up, and they violate the rules, lock them up. Or even worse, you were out and you committed a new crime, right? Even then, even more so, we should lock you up. And that's fine, but it's a trade-off, right? It's an understandable reaction, but it costs money. As the last slide in the previous lecture that I did, if you just wanted to look at that general description of felony probation in Hawaii, it showed that it wouldn't be cheap. So for every single person that we revoke probation on and send them to prison, it costs Hawaii about $81 more a day, or almost $30,000 a year. And those are 2006 numbers because I can't find any newer ones. So that's about 41 times more expensive policy, right? So it's a policy choice, but it's much, much, much more expensive. And the vast majority of people sitting in prison, something like 95%, this is nationally now, not in Hawaii, are going to get out one day. Okay, so they're going to go back into the community. So might be an argument that to keep them integrated into the community so where they know how to act is better, right? I think the real question is, how do we integrate convicted felons into the community or keep them in the community, right? And also have some sort of public safety for that, when we have people out on probation, right? But long story short is the more times we are revoking people and sending them back to prison, it's going to cost us a lot more money, right? So you're free to have your opinion, so am I. As I've said in other lectures, I tend to want to use prison as a last resort and to use it sparingly since it's so expensive, right? I'm all for using it in certain cases, don't get me wrong. But before I'm going to spend $30,000 more a year per person when I revoke somebody, I want to sort of be clear about that they're a serious danger to the community or they're stealing a lot of, either in terms of violence or property crime. So there's always costs to a policy. Okay, so that's important to realize. It's, there's the theory, oh yeah, just send them to prison. But yeah, we exist in the real world, right? And every amount of money every 29 grand that you spend towards sending somebody to prison, that's another school teacher, et cetera, where you could be spending the money in something productive, right? Regardless of where you spend it. Just briefly to remind you of the sort of describe the study here. Um, it studies only felony probationers, right? So felony's the most serious kind of offense, and they're the rarest of all crimes committed. Okay, so it's really sort of like, are we able to not lock up our most serious criminals because they're felony, right? And only a felony makes you eligible for prison, right? Which is different from jail, right? So this lecture doesn't look at less serious crimes, misdemeanors, etc. Okay. The data source for the study is from a computerized database that looked over 1,400 probationers from all district courts in Hawaii. So it represented all the incoming cases for 2 years. Now it is old, but remember, it's the most recent that I have just for Hawaii, right? So this study was actually done by my PhD chair of my committee, wonderful man. But you know, it's older, but it's better than nothing. Okay, um, that's where it comes from. Okay, we'll talk about the goals of the study next. All right, so there's 4 goals of the study, but only one is relevant to us here, and we want to look at what's the extent of compliance with the requirements of probation. Okay, now they measure this. It's not easy as success or failure. Okay, so there's 2 basic measures, and so there's 2 measures. There's 2 ways that they measure you messed up, you failed, and there's 2 ways that you measure that you succeeded. Okay, we're going to look at each of these. Okay, but what they make a really good point that just remember that there's oftentimes a time gap between the court action and what goes on, right? So even if they're arrested, okay, they can not show up in the time of the study. Okay, so let me read you just a quote here from page 13. Thus, the data may and do on occasion show a felony arrest, but make no motion to revoke, which may be either because the disposition at the time was unknown, that means the process took so long, right? Or because the arrest was dismissed or the case not prosecuted and the agency decided in light of the circumstances that revocation was not necessary. Only in the event of a felony conviction is revocation mandatory. In other cases, it's discretion of the agency and or the court. Okay. So there are 2 measures of each violation and success. Okay. So I'm going to show you a table. Okay. And I'm going to describe them both. Okay. So the easiest way to think about it is no violation and no arrest. A violation, it would be thinking of they're breaking the rules of probation. They're not committing a new crime. Okay, so you're not meeting with your parole officer. You're not taking your P test. You're not going to drug treatment. You're not looking for a job. So there's various rules to probation that don't involve committing a new crime, but you got to follow them, right? So that's what a violation is. So if you succeed, really the best measure of success is no violation and no arrest. Another, they chose this as a success because they weren't rolled up. It's called being rolled up and put into prison, right? They were arrested, but they weren't violated. Okay, so violation can mean, like, for example, you go to court, right, and they decide, okay, this isn't serious enough, right, or we're going to send you to prison, right? So when they violate your parole, they send you to prison. So remember, I did a poor job of explaining violation, right? You can violate the rules of probation, right? And they can decide not to send you back to prison, meaning it sounds like no violation. So I think the better way is to think of, did they go to prison, right? Were they locked up after? Okay. So did the court decide or the agency decide to violate their probation? Okay. So there's 2 kinds of that. Violation probation, right? Their probation was violated formally, but they were continued on probation and not incarcerated. Okay. And then there's violation and they sent them to prison. Okay, that's the last. Okay, so there's two types. There's just regular old felony, and then that DAG, DANK, or whatever you want to call it. That's the least serious types. So, for example, let's look at the first row, right? That's the best situation, right? Only 45% of people on regular felony probation didn't violate and didn't get arrested, but it's much higher with the other DAG group. I'm just going to say DAG. I'm not going to say both. And that's because they're less serious offenders. Okay? So when you look at the no violation subtotal, you can see about 60%, 57.8 for the regular folks didn't get violated, right? Did their job well. And then a much higher percent for the DAG folks. Okay, and then when you can see for the same thing on the very bottom for violations, right? Much higher for regular folks. And again, that's simply because that DAG group is a special kind of group where their seam is much more low probable. They're much less serious criminals, if you will, with a much less serious criminal history, and that would make sense. Okay? So what I do here is I really simplify it. I basically just took two of the things in the table, right? So you can see how I do the regular folks and the DAG people, right? You saw that. And then I sort of extrapolate and say in the far right column, well, if we combine those two categories, what percentage is it? Okay, so long story short, over half of regular folks on probation, right? Regular felony probationers are cool. They don't violate, right? Much higher for DAG, and then if you combine those two, it's about almost 2/3, 65%. Okay, violation, you can see there too, right, or failure. Okay, so in general, it does, about more than half for all, and much higher for the less serious, which makes sense. And if you combine those two, it's about 2/3, 1/3. All right. All right, so those people who are getting arrested, those to me are the most concerning, right? If you don't follow the rules of probation, right, meaning you're not showing up for your meeting, etc., that's not as serious a problem as you're out there committing new crimes. So basically, you're out in the community and you're using that freedom that they didn't have to give you, and you're still committing crimes. Okay? So basically, if you look at the very first row, okay, 68%, that's over 2/3 of all probationers never have any arrests, so they're not taking advantage of it. Okay, and then the far right column is, well, what if we look at just the folks who were arrested, right? So that's what I'm looking at. So just take a look at those numbers, okay? I basically use tables 11 and 12 here, okay? Now, what we really want to know here is there's sort of some problems here. Okay, is number one is, okay, they're arrested, but what are they arrested for, right? Not all arrests are created equal, meaning not all crimes are equal, right? First of all, we know that more than 2/3 never get arrested, so that's great, right? They're not using it. But of that third, what are they doing? Okay, that's important, right? Is it a felony? Is it less serious, etc.? So that's what the next slide looks for. All right. So all we have here is severity. Okay. What we don't have are what kinds of crimes. So, and I don't know why they combine felony A and B, but essentially, let me make sure I have this right for you. Look at my notes here. Just trying to find out which one is the most serious. Apologize. Okay, A is the most serious. So why are they combining A and B? Don't know. Okay. So essentially, look at the far right column. 63%. That's almost 2/3, right? 6 and 10, over 6 and 10, but very close to 2/3 are of the only. Remember, these are just the ones that get arrested, right? 2/3 of the people never get arrested. Okay, but of those who are arrested, most of those arrests are for misdemeanors, which is good. And as you go up the table, right, you see that they get less and less. So that's good. Okay. what's bad, and this is some of the weaknesses, right? And I don't know why they didn't do this, is they don't look at what sorts of crimes, right? So you know a felony is serious, right? But what kind of felony is it? Okay. Pretend that you're a drug user and we say, and I totally think it's stupid to lock people up for only using drugs because you can get any drug you want in prison. That's a dirty little secret. So that's a waste of money. But for example, felony for me, in terms, again, I'm thinking of public safety. When do I want to use the very expensive resource of prison? For my money, drug users are the least serious, right? I'm much more worried about violent offenses when they hurt somebody or property offenses when they steal somebody, right? So I would like to know, well, what are these kinds? What are they doing, right? Well, how are they abusing their freedom in the community? I know that only 11%, almost 12% are doing a felony A or B, but what was it for, right? So to me, that's an important part of the equation in terms of who are these people, how are they using their freedom, what sort of danger are they presenting to the public, okay? So were they violent, property, drug, traffic? That for me is very important, okay? So for me, that's a weakness. We don't know whether or not they're being arrested for dangerous crimes. Are they violent predatory felonies that really hurt somebody? Or are they violent petty misdemeanors, right, that cause no physical harm? There actually are violent crimes that don't cause any physical harm. If I threaten you with a weapon, right, but I don't do anything, right, that could be seen as a violent crime. If I'm stealing stuff, what am I stealing, right? Am I stealing the whole car? Or I'm going to show my age here. Or just the car stereo. Back in the day, when I was a young finster, basically companies didn't spend much money on their stock stereos. Now they're pretty good. But back in the day, if you wanted to have good sound in your car, you had to basically replace the one that came with the car with an aftermarket one. And those were you had to take out the stereo, right, from the car and put them in, so they were easy to steal, right? Not like nowadays. It's harder to steal a stock stereo, right? Because they're so embedded. But back in the day, it's very simple. It's two screws, okay, once you've replaced it. Okay, so point being is that stealing the car is much more serious than just stealing the car stereo, right? It's sort of like, I guess the equivalent would be I parked my car riding my bike away from Kaha Beach because there was waves and it was totally crowded by the beach, right? Somebody smashed my window and looked through my car for stuff, and all they got, I had change in my ashtray, so they took the whole ashtray, right? They got away with $5 at the most, right? That's a much less serious crime than stealing the whole car. Okay, so that's what I'm sort of getting at. That's what I want to know. So I need to know the answers to these questions where I can decide whether or not these arrested probationers should be locked up. Okay. You can sort of read what I write there. But, basically, we're looking at the costs and benefits of probation. All right. In conclusion, the purpose of the lecture was to sort of describe the success and failure of people on felony probation in the state of Hawaii. We explained some of the complexities, how to measure or not. Remember, there were 2 measures of success and 2 measures of failure, right? If we combined those 2, we found that about 2/3 of the people were successful and about 1/3 weren't, right? Higher when we looked at the less serious group of probationers, right? Then we looked at who's arrested. Of the third of people who are arrested, what are they getting arrested for? All we could look at in terms of what was the severity of felony, A and B combined, etc. Right? So whether or not, and again, the weakness, just to repeat real quickly, was that we don't know what the types of crimes. We just know how severe they are. I apologize for the old brain fart, right? Okay, so read this last part of the lecture notes so I won't have to bore you with it. All right, so that's the end of the lecture.